This identification is Eleanor Roosevelt, born 1884, died 1962. Eleanor Roosevelt was married to Franklin D. Roosevelt during the Great Depression and World War II. So she was First Lady in World War II and the Great Depression through two major events. Here's a picture of her in the Great Depression, volunteering for a food kitchen during the Depression. Eleanor Roosevelt was very busy as a First Lady and took on many different roles and did many different things. Again, this would be likely a picture of the food being served at the Depression. Here we see her working with some Girl Scouts. She was very active. She was not in the White House much. She was always outside throughout the Depression and even more so during World War II. Again, seeing her volunteer at a soup kitchen is, we know the Depression was one of the major economic crises in world history. So she was very active at this time. Now we see her a little older here, and she's visiting troops during World War II. You even see the airplane there. This is our Eleanor. U.S. planes in wartime, by the way, always seem to have lighthearted statements. It was part of history written on the plane noses. Quite different than some other countries that had such things as revenge written on their planes. But U.S. planes were known for a more lighthearted type of decorations. We see here right, flying in a plane uh, during World War II. She moved around quite a bit, and sometimes in some very unsafe areas. Here we see her visiting troops, receiving health care. So here, Eleanor Roosevelt is visiting with nurses. And this is an interesting letter that she wrote, really asking and campaigning for the idea of voting age being lowered, another expansion of voting rights, which we've seen before in this class. But in this request, she's talking about lowering the voting age to 18 because so many soldiers were under 21 and were not eligible to vote. This idea actually didn't take place for many decades until the voting age was lowered, which actually happened right after the Vietnam War. But it was originally an idea of hers. She wrote some autobiographies. She had many famous quotes. Here's one of her quotes about courage. Another of her famous quotes: "Poor minds talk about people, average minds talk about events, and great minds talk about ideas." Well, this is a shot of Eleanor Roosevelt visiting Cuba, and this is when Cuba was a free country before the revolution, which came later with Fidel Castro. But this is before that, and this is her visiting Cuba. another meeting she's having, obviously in a safe place. But this is she was a very active first lady. So this appears to be nearing the time when, after Franklin Roosevelt died and World War II was over, she was no longer a first lady, but she was very active, and her new goal was to work with the United Nations, and she achieved a very, very high status in that situation. Here, she is have her new role as a delegate to the United Nations. As you know, the United Nations was a group. It's still a very large organization of countries throughout the world, in which countries meet on a regular basis, called the United Nations. So the United Nations was created shortly after the end of World War II, and she became a representative to the United Nations, and actually the chairperson of the United Nations Commission on Human Rights. And one of the most important things she did was take part in the writing of the Declaration of Human Rights. That's the United Nations symbol. And there's President Truman on the right and Eleanor Roosevelt on the left. So once again, we see the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Which basically, its preamble talks about that, similar to the Declaration of Independence, but now it was worldwide, and the idea it was that all people worldwide have individual rights and the rights, especially to dignity, and that summarizes much of what was said in this declaration. Okay, so she did. It was we have covered many things. I actually have this book. It's called Eleanor Roosevelt, You Learn by Living, and it's a book written by her. Which, when we talk about, it's primary evidence is when you actually read the writings of the people rather than just some historian position. So that way you understand more what was written right at the time. And this is another good source book. It's her autobiography, so it was written by her about her life and all of the things that she went through. And this is a statue dedicated to Eleanor Roosevelt. So she was one of the most important first ladies in U.S. history, and certainly the most active and outgoing. She suffered some criticism from comics and from newspapers, but ultimately she was greatly successful and greatly admired, and just kept going in spite of the mean criticism. Uh, so she's still a very important person in history. She was born 1884 and died in 1962.